My name's Paul Bestall. This is Mysteries and Monsters on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Welcome to this week's episode of Mysteries and Monsters. Just before we dive into this week's episode, I just want to say congratulations to one of my oldest and dearest friends, Dan Branham, on the continuing success of his fantastic new board game, Nudge. Dan's one of the most talented designers and artists I know, and like me, has finally embraced his calling at a more mature age, shall you say. You can check out the brilliant game on his website, nudgegames.co.uk. And it's 100% eco-friendly. So, what more have you got to lose? Good luck, Dan. Keep it up, mate. Anyway, on to today's episode. And it's a belter. I'm delighted to welcome back author and former policeman Andy Gilbert to discuss his new book, Credible Witness 2, More Paranormal Police Stories. Andy was one of my first guests, so I was both delighted and intrigued to see his second collection of first-hand accounts of police officers being released. All the stories show accounts of police officers coming face-to-face with the paranormal. Too often we hear second-hand stories or urban myths passed off as actual emergency service stories. So that's what makes Andy's books stand out, as they are all first-hand accounts direct to himself, and for the price of a coffee, you can get yourself a copy on Kindle through Amazon. Just before we dive in, don't forget to follow us on Facebook. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, and we're also on Twitter and Instagram. Oh, and make sure you keep listening after the interview, as I have a spooky surprise for you all. Right, let's take a trip into the paranormal with former police officer Andy Gilbert. Everyone loves a good ghost story, be it one shared with friends around a fire on a winter's night, or underneath the stars outside in the summer. There is nothing that gets the pulse racing more than a good scare. But some paranormal encounters tend to give us pause for thought, those reported by the emergency services. I'm delighted to welcome back author and former policeman Andy Gilbert to discuss his second volume of first-hand accounts, Credible Witness 2, More Paranormal Police Stories. Andy, welcome back to Mysteries and Monsters. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. Delighted to be here.
Oh, well, here we are, Volume 2. Obviously, when we had our first chat a few months ago, I know you were building up to getting it out. So, how did you find collating the second volume? Was it easier? Did you put yourself under any more pressure, Andy?
Well, after the first one came out, I was because, like you said in your introduction, it's really good for people to talk and have that conversation when you're with friends. Have you ever seen a ghost? And you'll be surprising how many people will actually, if they trust you enough, they'll actually tell you. And after the book had come out, I went on a local radio station. I did some podcasts like this one, and people started getting in touch with me with stories. And I thought, oh, what a shame you didn't get in touch with me in time to put these stories in the book. And it got to a point where I'd got half a book completed, and I'd got some really interesting stories. So I thought, will I ever get enough to do another book? So I started asking some friends in the building trade, because I knew from my research online there'd been quite a few reports of people who had been renovating old properties and they'd witnessed things. Yeah. But unfortunately, nothing was forthcoming. So when Christmas was out the way, I thought, right, I'm going to commit to this now. And I just started emailing all the retired police officers associations So I spent a day writing and writing and writing emails, and then I waited, and then the story started coming back.
I mean, do you on the back of the first book, Andy, and obviously your press appearances? I mean, it was wonderful to see you appear in the press last week in your local newspaper as well. So, have you noticed that second time around there's a bit more anticipation in regards to the second volume?
I think there was. I mean, I did once sound. I think it was difficult second album syndrome. I think if you're in a band, and so I was very wary of that, thinking, "Oh, is he just?" I mean, as you know, everything goes to a charity anyway. But I didn't want people thinking, "Oh, is he just trying to force it out, and he flogging the same old stuff?" But I don't think so, because the stories that came in were different, and some of them were equally as good as I think as some of the ones that were in the first book.
Yeah, I mean it's incredible, really, because it's one of those things when you talk to people about the paranormal. Yeah, like I mentioned in the introduction, Andy, there always seems to be something where if it's a police officer or fire service or ambulance or nurses, it tends to be taken with far more credence by the general public or by your friends who aren't in the forces, emergency services, than it perhaps does with colleagues. Did you get any kind of feedback from the general public, sort of on a positive way, in regards to these first-hand accounts?
I think it does help if you're part of the emergency service, although that doesn't make anybody any more honest or any more credible. I think it's with it being the theme for the book. I think it's because it's from a group of people who, there's nothing wrong in anybody talking about saying if they've had a strange happening, a paranormal happening. I just wish more people would talk about it, because there is that stigma involved in all walks of life. But I think more so in the emergency services policing world is that even now, some of these stories, it was the first time they were being told. And, I sent the letter, they said, please don't, I know who they are. None of these are anonymous stories or second hand.
Yeah.
I know who's told me all these and the identity of the people, but I haven't put them in. They said, please don't say that, because obviously reputation. Even now, some of them 30 years afterwards, they're very conscious of the fact that their credibility might be questioned, and their sanity might be questioned.
Yeah, I mean, it's intriguing, because what I like about this second volume is obviously there's a lot of building blocks in the first book, especially Aldridge Police Station, and it seems that the first book kind of opened a whole range of stories that perhaps you weren't aware of, because people suddenly realised they were not the only person to have experienced something spooky in these certain locations.
Yes. Now, Aldridge is like, I think it's classed as a village. But it's not in the country. It's not far from Warsaw. It's in sort of the West Midlands. The police station is relatively an unremarkable building on a high street, and I have tried to find out as best as I could, has there anything happened there? Has anyone died there? Has there been any tragedy there? And I couldn't find out anything. Yet it is my belief that is the most haunted police station, certainly in the Midlands. There's now 4 stories that have been told by 4 separate officers who've not corroborated with each other, because none of them know who each other is. If they've all come to me separately. But there's in the second book, there's these 2 officers who they say, look, we're both genuine 6-footers. We're both taser officers. We're not shrinking violets. But sometimes we go into that station and we just used to turn around and say, not tonight, because it was quite obvious there was something there. And they'd had the experience of seeing the figure at the window, which had forced them to go in and run into the station. I mean, another officer in the previous book had seen a figure in the window, which had the opposite effect on him. He got out of there pretty sharpish. There's like the thunder crashing of like the activity on the other floors. So that he put it into perspective, saying, I'd like to tell you all about mine. Obviously, the incident in the cell block as well, with the feeling of the pressure and the cold. And in the first book also, there was the sergeant who had the coat stand fly across the room.
Mm.
So as I was preparing I was nearly just going to sort of press, I got contacted by another sergeant who said, is it too late? I need to tell you about my story. Again, a lot of similar things with the noises. And he actually went up there onto the landing where the noises were coming from. And whatever it was, whoever it was, he said, grabbed him on the wrist.
Yeah.
You know, and that was the first time there'd been sort of like the physical contact. And again, a similar story of just, I think he sums it up quite well when he says, after a particularly active night there, when the cleaner came in the morning, he just hugged her and said he was just delighted to see another person.
I mean,
and then
go on, Andy.
Well, then she says to him, well, I'm glad you said that because something followed me into the toilets last week. And she said that there's something that seems to be following her around. So we've now got four different, well, 5 officers in total, but 4 different accounts of Aldridge Police Station.
Absolutely. Well, and now obviously you've got the cleaner chiming in as well, although it's obviously not first hand. She's, that completely, for me, strengthens the whole thing. And it's weird, like you say, because, if you look at that kind of thing, you think, well, it's a police station. With the greatest of respect, it's not really going to be the scene of a violent situation. You would hope. I know these things do happen occasionally in stations and have done in the past, but primarily it's usually somewhere that's secure and safe.
Yeah. Well, the last officer who gave the account, his interpretation of it was that whatever it was trying to get his attention. Not wanting to do him harm, but wanting to get his attention. But yeah, it's I don't think there's ever been any investigation done inside the building.
Yeah,
I do find it quite. In West Midlands, they've got Steelhouse Lane, which is the old central lockup, a very grand old, I think, Victorian sort of building. And I think they were doing some sort of ghost thing there. And I'm thinking, you way off. The most haunted police station, in the West Midlands is Aldridge, but I suppose it's not got the same sort of tourist attraction.
Absolutely, and I think the strange thing about Aldridge is it's a variety of phenomenon. I mean, usually if you've got a haunted place, it's usually a certain spirit seen to move about, or it's a certain noise. But Aldridge seems to have 3 or 4 different phenomena going on. Like you say, you've got the faces at the window.
Yeah.
You've got the heavy oppressive feeling. Once again, it's somewhere where people know instantly if it's a welcoming night, if that makes sense. But then you've also got the people being glimpsed out the corner of their eye, and obviously all the. I mean, the thing I always find fascinating is these crashing sounds that essentially sound like somebody's smashing the place up.
Yeah.
But not a thing's out of place. It's incredible how varied it is in that one locale. Yeah.
I mean, they've had when they've heard all the noises and the crashing, there's not been anything sort of displaced. But the sergeant who gave me the first story, he was in the room when the coat stand, flew across the room. But the activity seems to centre on the first floor and the office. That I think is the sergeant's office. That's where the face has been seen. That's where the coat stand was moved, and then of course there's the cell block as well. So there's 3 different points of main activity. But like you say, there's a big variety of. Is there more than one? Is it the same one doing it? Very, very strange.
Yeah, and it's happened over a long period of time. This isn't like a rash of incidents over a short period of time. These are being reported over several years, aren't they?
Yes, they have been. And all the activity takes place overnight.
Yeah, it's clearly somebody likes a bit of company there at night, I think, and it's crazy. I mean, one of the ones. I always love stories of terrified driver. Not that I'm saying it sounds like a great idea, but terrified drivers, and once again you've got a motorist who's absolutely convinced he's run somebody over.
Yes.
And it's obviously the officer that's dealing with the report and having to deal with this member of the public, when he's coming in to report it, it's kind of like one of his colleagues, it's water off a duck's back for them.
Yeah, it was at that time. There's been more laying in Birmingham, Erdington, Birmingham. You've got the large cemetery. I think it's one of the biggest ones in Birmingham. And funny enough, in the first book, we had a police officer on foot patrol, saw somebody walk through the wall into the cemetery. But if you were if you were trying to find the best place where you might think there might be some paranormal activity, you have an enormous graveyard, and a long road. Yeah. There's the pub that was called the Grave Diggers, and we've had quite a few incidents of people crossing that road and motorists were going into the police station saying I'd hit somebody, but they hadn't. And I think if you actually look online, there's been quite a few reported in the Birmingham area. There's a couple of strong cases where somebody went to the Evening Mail, but yeah, a lot of activity down there.
I always find these stories incredible, really, because at the end of the day, these motorists are, we know that they're sober. We know they're, because God forbid anybody under the influence who approaches a police officer and says, I've just run somebody over in my car. So you straight away take that out of the equation, Andy, which is the normal excuse for such things. It's perhaps he's had a bit too much to drink, or or they perhaps may have partaken in some herbal remedies, shall we say?
Yes.
But these are people who are so scared, and despite all the lack of physical evidence in every situation, they're just compelled to try and go to the police regardless.
It is, and it's interesting also that in the second book, there's the two officers who are actually driving their own car. Mm. When another car appears in front of them, and they drive straight through it.
Yeah. I mean,
so we have two officers there.
Yeah.
They've both experienced the same incident, and it's very matter of fact. They said all we could think of was that we passed through a car that must have been involved in some sort of fatal. Yeah. I mean, just straight through it. They thought we were going to crash. Out of nowhere, car in front, passed straight through.
I mean, once again, they're for me probably the best stories. Not that I'm belittling anything else, primarily because there are some fantastic stories reported by individuals. But I think when you've got more than one person who experiences exactly the same thing, for me, that just takes it to a different level, because as we discussed back on the first show, you had that incredible situation where two officers saw a man on a horse appear from nowhere.
Yes. Yeah.
So go on, Andy. Sorry.
I'm just saying, you're quite right. Being sceptical is good, and if you're looking at it from an evidence point of view, is the evidence corroborated? Was there something else? And then if you look, were there incidents there in the past that people have reported the same sort of thing? That's why I think, like in the case of like Moor Lane and the case of Aldridge, there's overwhelming evidence that there is some form of paranormal phenomenon there, because it's corroborated from different sources. And the people who've witnessed things by themselves, of course, yes, people will always be more sceptical of them. But there are a number of incidents in this book where the two officers have witnessed exactly the same thing.
It's remarkable, and I think when you get a situation like that, like I say, it just takes it to a different level, because once again, a sceptical excuse for such things would be hallucination. We're overworked. He's tired. Perhaps they're stressed. They've got situations at home. For me, for two members of the police to be both undergoing the same psychological stresses to enable that hallucination to be a valid excuse just doesn't hold water, Andy, I think.
No, it doesn't. And of course, there's a different kind of corroboration. Like I said, when there's been similar incidents reported. And the one I found interesting was the police cadets in Baswich House in Staffordshire. Now, when the officer sent me through the story, and I read it through, and I thought, I know that story, and I thought, I'm sure I've seen that in a book somewhere. And so I contacted him and said, have you told anyone else this? And he said, no, mate. He said, you're the only person. It's only because the email came round, and he said, you're the only person I've ever told it to, for obvious reasons. He said, the ridicule aspect again.
Yeah.
Right. And he said, well, apart from the person who was with me, obviously they know about it. And so I went and had a look in my old books, all the books I'd been sort of using and looking around. And sorry, that's my phone going off. That's very unprofessional. Not that I'm a professional anyway, but it was interesting that story featured in a book that had been written by another author. And I think it was, what was it, 20 years previous?
Yeah, I think back in the late 60s, I think that started, the first incident. And once again, it's surprising, because it seems that it was reported at the time, Andy, but then it had just vanished from people's memories. Nobody knew. It wasn't, these lads weren't kind of warmed up going, oh, you're staying in the spooky room. There was none of that going on at all, was there?
No. Again, I think that's part of the culture that people don't like to always share these things. But yeah, there was a massive time gap, yet they both experienced exactly the same thing. I found that fascinating.
Absolutely. And once again, these are the kind of stories I always find very intriguing. It's as if whatever's involved in this is completely unaware that there's somebody sat in their bed. It's as if it's just an action replay, regardless of the situation or anybody being in that room, Andy.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder how often did it happen in the intervening years? Because the pattern of behaviour by the spirit or the ghost was the same 20 years later. Identical behaviour. Absolutely,
and it does beg a belief, because I'm sure we all know, Andy, we've got friends who could probably sleep through an earthquake. And it makes you wonder just how many times it happened and people didn't realise it had happened.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's remarkable, like you say, but it was really interesting, like I say, because as you did your research and you found the book with the story from 1968, the fact that you had got such a long gap means that clearly this is it's probably still going on to this day.
I think it's been knocked down now. I think the whole site's been cleared.
Yeah.
And they've moved HQ, so I think there's a load of houses being built on it. But
well,
it's that's, I think, I'm not completely certain. I know that certainly their headquarters has moved. But if you are, with all the police cuts and what have you, when there's police buildings up for sale and a lot of them being converted into flats and apartments, you never know what sort of might be in there. And there have been incidents of that in the past. I think there was one down south, and I think Canterbury Road, which again features in both books.
Yeah.
Because in the second book, we've actually got an officer who's actually seen the Canterbury Road ghost, and I think the long-term plans are that that's going to be turned into some sort of apartments, but there might be a residence already in there.
Yeah, and one who's clearly a little bit mischievous, because I think isn't the story, one of the stories in the second volume is an officer goes to have a kit because he's been on and he's going to be back on at 6 a.m. I think.
Yeah.
And his boots vanish, and he just thinks one of his colleagues is pulling his leg.
Yeah. He goes down to the guy who told the story, and he says, I don't know what you're on about. And then it was another occasion when the officer who'd been accused of the moving the boots, when he actually saw this figure of the man fly up the wooden stairs without any sound and disappear. And I picked that up off a Facebook group. It popped up now and again, and there it was, people talking about old Canterbury Road, and quite rightly, some people were saying, well, it's an old building. When it starts to cool down, there will be all those noises, but there this wasn't that. This was a person. And we've also had cell doors slamming, which that doesn't happen by themselves, and that's quite a unique sound, and it just doesn't slam by itself.
Absolutely. I mean, that for me was one of the scariest, spookiest stories in the first volume, because, as we mentioned at the time, I know how much those doors weigh.
Yeah.
They don't move for love nor money unless you give them a good old heave.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
so
brilliant. I mean, another strengthening to some of these stories is when we have animals involved.
Yes.
And there's a story that you've managed to get hold of about Salford Royal Hospital.
Yes.
And as soon as I started reading that, I was thinking, well, I wonder where we're going to go with this. And as soon as the dog turned up, I thought, oh no.
Yeah. I think that animals seem to have a sense of things that we don't, and in that circumstances, I mean, I think the officer, I think she was very brave anyway in going in the building, but she had something that are normally quite a police dog is normally fearless, and clearly that dog did not want to go any further to investigate those noises, and there was I think the officer as well felt herself, it just wasn't right. But that dog, a trained dog that's never had a problem in the past, normally they'll love to run out in an empty, dark building and try and find somebody. Yeah. Just did not want to go any further. And interestingly, we also had the security guard who returned home. The activity at his flat in Kent.
Yeah.
When that was surrounded by more than one police officer, they all heard the activity inside. But when he returned, his dog did not want to go back in the building. And of course, we had the one of the ghost horse when the officer had just finished duty and was out walking his dog. Again, the dog decided to do one, so to speak. So there's three examples there where animals seem to have a great sense of something that perhaps we might not.
Absolutely, and I think the other thing that strengthens these stories is that obviously on a professional and a personal level, anybody that's working with dogs builds a relationship up. It's a mutual trust situation, Andy, isn't it?
It is, yes. Particularly with a police dog and a police handler, they're quite happy to go into any situation because the dogs are fearless. And she does make the point that never behaved like it before, never behaved like it afterwards.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, she says, my dog continued to work as an exemplary police dog and never had any other problems when going on to search for hidden persons. Yeah.
And of course, I found it interesting, obviously, because I got the story and then did a little bit of research about the tragic bombing that had taken place there. And, very interesting story, that one.
Absolutely, yeah, because I think was a group of nurses had gone to the cellar to try and get protection, and unfortunately they took a direct hit.
Yes, yeah, and it is. I think it's always interesting for the person who's researching it and for the reader when you can find a little bit of background out about things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it at least gives you some kind of history to the building, because as I'm sure you're aware, and you've probably come across during the book, Andy, there are always spooky old buildings and things where people will always say, oh, this happened, but some, like I say, on several occasions in the book, you've got veritable information overload with some of these stories, because you've been able to verify the exact incidents that have happened that prove that these aren't just tall tales or just gossip down the years.
That's right, because we all have, when we're kids, there's always if a house is old, it's always haunted. If there's a lane that's dark, well, that's always haunted too. And that's how stories start and people start to build up, But these are, there are facts attached to many of the stories in the book. It's not just a case of the local rumour mill saying, "Oh, this is a spooky place."
Yeah, absolutely, and it's one of those things. I think, like you say, if it's secluded and it's dark or it's an old country lane, there are many a tale that just grow up around them, don't they?
Of course they do, yeah.
I think I was struck as well. There's one other story that really stands out for me, and it's from the chap who's strangely driving down a country lane, and then all of a sudden, from nowhere, his car windscreen begins to freeze up, but it seems to be happening on the inside of the car.
Yes. Now, I actually met that former colleague. I went to my partner sings in a choir, and they were singing actually at Stillhouse Lane, which is now a museum, the Cell Blocks Museum, and it was to raise money for Parkinson's. So I'd gone along to watch that, and lo and behold, he was there, and we started talking. Oh, what you up to? And I just said, oh, I did this book, and then he just looked at me, and then said, I've got a story to tell you. And he said, I really, and he explained it to me. He said, I'm going to go home and write it all out. He said, I want to do it justice. He said, but he said, you know, it's absolutely terrifying because the whole windscreen froze from the inside, and it froze instantly from the inside. Yeah, absolutely terrifying.
And that one, I can't, kind of. Also, it covers a couple of really good things, and the thing about this story is it's got a lovely sting in the tail, I think, for me, because obviously this poor PC decides, he tells somebody what's happened, and obviously he gets his leg pulled for a couple of weeks.
Yes.
Every time he's going into the canteen, anybody, hey, how you doing? And I think a couple of his colleagues had tried to wind him up on that very night, I think, by pretending to be something paranormal. But
yes.
So towards the end, I think he goes back and somebody's pulling his leg, and then I think, is it the dive team interject and just basically take this story to a different level?
They do. Whilst they're there, I think someone says, "Oh, seen any more ghosts lately, Sarge?" And they were on the next table and over here, and then joining the conversation. And one of the dive officers says, "Well, I kept horses down there. There's an awful lot of stories about the and we've just spoke about how these things can build up. But apparently, it was one of the cottages was the home of the last Birmingham hangman." I've tried to verify that, but haven't been able to do so. But he actually turns around and says there are an awful lot of paranormal events down there. He said, because I had stables down there, and I was there, people reporting things all the time.
Yeah, and I think, the thing that probably gives their input credence is, dive teams are tough people, because you're dealing with some pretty nasty situations, aren't you, Andy?
Well, funny enough, a retired colleague of mine, a friend of mine, got the book 2 days ago, phones me up, starts talking about this story, says, I grew up there when I was a lad, and it was always like, it was a famous area, proper spooky. And he then went for a drive down there. Last night he sent me some photographs of the location, because I've never been there.
Yeah.
And he's saying, he said, growing up, he said it was always the place. And he said to me, he said, when I was driving down there, he said, I felt uneasy. And that was yesterday afternoon in broad daylight.
And I mean, that's the other good thing as well. There you are straight away. Somebody's got the book, thought, oh, I know all about. Then again, have you already started to see people coming to you again, Andy, off the back of the second volume?
Well, because I have an interest in this, but it's not like it's with me. Nowadays, it's beer and football, and I do enjoy writing. I do enjoy this subject because I've got to meet with some very interesting people. I've got to go on podcasts like this, which I think is really great. But I can't say I enjoy writing, and I'm sort of a reluctant sort of author about these two books, which might sound strange considering I've done 2 books on it now.
Yeah.
But it all started with just that one. Have you ever seen a ghost? And then a couple of incidents, and it just snowballed. And I thought, my word, this world that's out there, we know so little about. And I suppose I've got a fine tune now. I've not yet had anyone come forward and say, "Ah, you've just missed me," but I have heard somebody told me about an incident that happened recently in Ladywood Police Station, whereby one of the female officers thought she heard right behind her shoulder somebody say, "All right, love," and then a few days later there was a witness in one of the waiting rooms downstairs. She said she heard a male voice say to her, "What are you doing here?" And so she came out and there was nobody there. And the feeling is that it's one of the old cleaners that used to live there. That the exact phraseology was the way he used to say things. So it's still going. You know, I'm not going to actively pursue a third volume, but I dare say people will contact me, and I'm always happy to hear these stories. But I think I'll be pursuing other things now.
Yeah, I mean, have you been surprised at how well they've been received, Andy? I mean, and the fact that it's perhaps brought you in touch with colleagues and people from around the country that you would have never normally met, regardless of, you know, all being serving police officers, regardless.
Yeah, it has. I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed meeting people. I've really enjoyed interviewing them, and it's also reinforced. It's reinforced my belief that there is something beyond, because you know, I've spoken to these people. These are genuine people, and they cannot all be wrong.
Yeah.
And I just think that the conversation, the more people have the conversation with friends and family, I just think the more interesting it will become for all of us. Absolutely.
I think one of the stories that makes me chuckle as well, I would imagine this is something of a professional reoccurrence, I would imagine, for colleagues around the country, Andy, is that you had a couple of officers who bumped into some ghost hunters who were in a derelict house.
Yes.
And both sets of people have the same experience independently.
Yeah, now that's a fascinating story, because I met that officer at a party, just and I remember just having a quick chat with him, because this was going back a little bit, and he explained it to me, and I said, well, that's fascinating for two reasons. I said, because you've gone into this house because you've seen some sort of lights flashing. As you've gone up the stairs, you've heard the sound of what sounds like a bed being dragged across the floor. And again, there's two officers together, so it's corroborated. And then they've had a choice then, because they've heard voices from one room and they've heard something being dragged from the second room. So they chose, well, we'll go with the voices and we'll, you know, see what's going on there. So they burst in, expecting to find obviously people perhaps tatting or what have you, you know, stealing the metal, or burglars, because they were empty houses.
Yeah.
And they're actually ghost hunters. So the ghost hunters had a fright, the police officers had a fright, but when they played back the tape, they had heard that they picked up the sound of what the police officers heard when they came up about the previous occupant had died, and that, you know, there's apparently some activity in one of the rooms that sounded like a bed being dragged across the floor. So that was sort of a double whammy, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's intriguing, because once again we have a story with, I think there were 3 ghost hunters, weren't there, and 2 officers.
Yes.
So once again you have 5 people there, all having the same experience.
Yeah, and obviously the ghost hunters had acted on the intelligence that people had said there's something going on here.
Yeah.
So we've got that information's passed first. They go along and they've obviously recorded that, and it's also been heard by police officers at the same time.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's strong evidence, I would suggest.
Absolutely, and especially with the recording being involved as well, that, you know, the officers weren't primed, they weren't told what they'd recorded, but as soon as they played it, it was exactly what they'd heard.
Yes, that's right.
Now, I think there's one story that in the book which is just incredible, really, and unfortunately, it's probably the most gruesome story in the book as well. It's It's about the murder of the lady above the Chinese restaurant.
Yes.
Now, when I read that, you know, through the first part of that story, it seems like a pretty tragic event, and I was kind of expecting the story to go in one particular direction. So to say changes the whole expectation of what happens there, Andy. I just found that story incredible. It's. I mean, you've got a awful situation. You've got a complete lack of substantial evidence. Nobody can kind of work out what on earth's the reason for this, and yet you end up with somebody completely not connected to the case, just showing, well, I don't know what. It's incredible.
Well, they demonstrated they had a knowledge of what had happened through sort of, how do you explain it? They've sort of seen it through psychic means. They've had the whole thing. They've witnessed the whole thing, beatly, psychically, and a considerable distance away. And when the officers went to, it was the bottom of the pile because the investigation was struggling, but because the SIO was very thorough, he said, well, we'll go and do everything. And of course they had the laugh and the joke on the journey. They're expecting to see the stereotypical, an old lady with a house full of cats, and
yeah.
But this is what people think, don't they? Yeah. There is that, and they go there and they meet a very respectable couple, and a very intelligent lady tells them things that she could not possibly know unless she was, well, that only probably the people who were there at the time knew. And of course, the officer then goes back and visits the scene, and everything that was said was corroborated, and the prediction that she made about the offender turned out to be quite accurate.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Yeah, I mean I'm talking about it now, and it's giving me a little bit of a chill up my spine. I have to be honest, because it's an easy criticism sometimes, I think, because sadly there are a lot of people out there who try to take advantage of such situations and offer their services to the police.
Yeah.
Claiming that they can help in the case, and many, especially in the States, there are plenty of psychics that have claimed to have solved hundreds of cases, and then you put them under scrutiny, and things just kind of don't really stack up. But
no,
this is one of those cases, I think, because we'd got the murder of a woman and a child, and very horrific, to be fair. This is not just a murder. It's a gruesome story. That kind of information, because of the circumstances, would not have been released to the press anyway. So
no.
There was it's often said, oh well, they've read about the case, everything's been in the case, they're just repeating stuff and adding a bit of mysticism to it. But at this, there was nothing that this lady, she had no connection to the area, the people, the case at all, and just felt compelled to come forwards.
Yeah, and this is way back before the way social media is now, and everything is 24-hour news channels. This is going way back, before then. And there, like you say, there are with spiritual, paranormal. Of course, there's money to be made, isn't there? There's lots, with if you've got a ghost, you can make some money out of it.
Absolutely, sadly.
So you've always got to be wary of people doing that. You've always got to be wary of people who think they may have some form of gift, and they may not.
Yeah.
And that can cause an awful lot of difficulty and upset for people. But we have to realise that there are people who have a gift, who have the ability to connect with things that perhaps we might not want to understand. But there are many genuine people who do have that ability.
Absolutely.
Whether or not they will consider it a gift, I don't know. But it's some people genuinely do. have that ability.
Absolutely, and I think that's what takes this story to a different level for me, is the fact that she didn't want no publicity. She wasn't going to the press or anything.
No,
She simply wanted to help as much as she could. I think for her own peace of mind. I think because it obviously the other aspect of this case is she kind of relived this awful event.
yeah, and it's not it doesn't do it for it professionally, but just has these things happen, and I think there are people out there that do, whether they like it or not, that are going to experience things, and it must be very difficult for them at times to think, well, what do I do? Again, because we have there's always a willingness to be to ridicule, isn't there? And that's the natural thing. If we don't understand something, we'll either dismiss it or just try and sort of perhaps make light of it. And I hope that these couple of books just will help people. Just let's be more open and honest with each other. Let's have some honest conversations with each other, because you can't, not everybody's wrong, and there are things that we don't understand. And as much as the scientists like to put everything in this box and everything in that box and say there's absolutely no such thing as ghosts, well.
I mean,
yeah, okay, you're entitled to have that opinion, but how can you explain this? And again, you can throw as much science as you want at various things, but you can't science these things away. You can't science away two police officers seeing a man on a horse cross straight in front of them. You can't science two police officers driving through a phantom car. Because what you'd be asking us to believe is that they've had simultaneous sort of, I don't know, it just doesn't make, what they're saying, what they would be saying doesn't make sense. A scientist, please explain to me about Aldrich, about all the 4 different witnesses. Please explain to them that there's no such thing as anything paranormal, because the evidence suggests that there is.
Yeah, and we're talking about people who are used to being in tense and dangerous situations, Andy. Regardless, these are people with a strong, sensible mindset. Everything you do is evidence based. These people are supported by the framework of analysis and evidence. So, for everybody in this book, and obviously the previous volume as well. For them, these are things that have happened outside what they've been trained to accept as evidence.
Yeah. And I mean, some people. I mean, I think in the first book there was a guy, and I use this as an example because sometimes when I put the other thing, I think, I'm getting a few stories in, and somebody put a comment on, there's no such thing as ghosts. There's only highly strung people. And I think I said to him, I said, well, the person who witnessed this is a decorated ex-Royal Marine, ex-professional boxer. He does not scare easily. And if he tells me he's seen a ghost, he's seen a ghost. And it's as simple as that. This is not somebody who scares easily or is highly strung.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing, as we touched on it the first time we spoke, and you've referred to it a couple of times, this is not a profession where you put your hand up and admit to these experiences, because of the way colleagues take it and the general response to anybody seeing a ghost, especially with some of these older stories. I would imagine people are a little bit more accepting, I think, these days. Perhaps not so much in a professional capacity, Andy, but I think outside of the confines of a job or a role, I think people talk about these subjects far more these days than perhaps they did 30, 40 years ago.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. I think there was that because when we've had like very young officers, who've been chased by ghosts, and I think the officer who with the horse, the ghost horse situation, said, spoke to me, went home, told my wife, he said, well, let's just not say anything because something like that in those days could have hung around me for the rest of your career. We're always the one that saw the ghost. If you get the wrong person, and of course there also there is humour around where people will say, "Oh, did you reckon?" Or whatever, put the kettle on, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So there's not always people being nasty. It's just people being just, well, yeah, okay, you saw a ghost, but now we've got to go and deal with that burglary. But I do think that the conversations are now being held more, and more people are having the conversation. I mean, I was in Buxton recently.
Oh, yeah.
So I wrote a comedy show, and I did a 1 hour show at the Buxton Fringe Festival.
Oh, brilliant.
But that's what I'm sort of working on now. But when I went to the hotel, I was just checking in, and there was a young girl there, and she just said, "Oh, I wanted to change something on the booking," and she said, "I'm new here. I don't know how to do that." Now, I've done this before in other circumstances. When I find out someone's new in a place, I used to do it when I was in the police, and I goes, "Oh, have they told you about the ghost yet?" Now, I didn't know anything. I was just basically just hoping to get that reaction of, "Oh no, what ghost?" I know it's childish, I know it's not big and it's not clever, but it's just something that I just felt the need to do. And she goes, "Oh yes, I know all about it." And then the girl who'd worked there longer came out and started doing it, and they just sort of, and I said, "Well, what's all this about the ghost then?" And she said, "Oh, the ghost on the first floor. She actually announced it. Mrs. So and So used to live here way back when. I've seen her a few times, and she tends to sort of she's got a bit of an attachment to me. And we've got another ghost of a dog that's been seen a few times around the front of the building. This was the Palace Hotel in Buxton." And I was just sort of, "Oh right." So there's my little sort of prank had backfired on me, so to speak, because they said, "Yeah, there is ghosts here," and so. Anyway, I did give them a copy of the book because I felt a little bit bad. I said, "Oh, this is why I've got an interest. Please, please have this copy of the book." I wasn't trying to, and they just laughed and said, "No, the hotel is haunted."
Well, to be fair, whenever I go anywhere, Andy, I'm always being nosy and asking similar questions, so I know exactly where you come from, and you know, when you go somewhere, I mean, especially a place like Buxton, because it's a historical town. It's had. It's a lot of history in that little town for where it is. So it's, there's a few places in the Peak District and around Derbyshire where, there's some, obviously the most famous is probably Eyam, the plague village, which is a wonderful, well, not, obviously not a very nice situation, but it's wonderful to basically just take a walk through history. It's incredible when you go there.
Yes. Yeah, it is full of. But I just find it quite funny. There was me trying to be clever, stroke humorous, and matter of fact, no, we've got a few here, mate.
Yeah, and they always seem. I mean, places like that, hotels and theatres and things, they seem to embrace their resident spirits a lot more than some places. I think, Andy, they seem quite welcoming and comfortable having a spirit wandering around.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that nobody seems to get hurt. In some case, I try, there are different kinds of hauntings and what have you, and I think in some cases, whatever's going on, they've had absolutely no interest in us whatsoever. They're just going about doing what they do, whether that's on some sort of loop or not, I do not know. And there are some places where it's just accepted, and I'm sure there's people listening now and say, "Well, yeah," and it's just accepted that there is someone or something still hanging around the place, but they're not there to in terms of there are the odd sort of poltergeist that can be quite nasty, but a lot of these spirits of people who are known and identified don't seem to want to harm anybody.
I mean, like I say, the majority of the stories, it's usually a noise or sounds of something happening. You've got a few apparitions, but I mean, there's a lovely little chapter where you've got a number of reports from officers who discuss seeing very striking individuals out of place who either they turn. I mean, I think there's one guy who's driving down a road about, was it 3 a.m. in the morning, and he passes an old man and he's like,
yes.
Well, what on earth is he doing out? Spins the car around, comes back, he's gone. Yeah.
I think there's a few sort of roadside incidents of that nature where there's I think there's another one with he almost runs over a woman in grey on his way home, There's the incident in Lincolnshire where the occupants of the car have a ghost of a girl pass through the car.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's quite a few. I suppose the nature of roads and what have you, they do tend to attract quite a bit of activity.
Absolutely, because like I said, the old man did. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, Andy. But the thing that stands him out is the fact he was using a walking frame.
I can't remember about the frame. I know he was very frail.
Yeah.
And I know that the officer, it was on his mind a lot. So when he came back to work, he did go and he was making inquiries with the coroner's office, and he did establish himself that there had been an old man run over on that road.
Yeah.
Because it was preying on his mind. Yeah.
I mean it's one of those things that, I mean, if you have that experience and you probably came back just to, I would imagine he was hoping there was no report of such a situation. But I can't imagine what it must feel like when you see something and you have the opportunity to be able to look at the incident log and or any particular incidents in that area, Andy, to then actually see an event that matches up to what you've experienced. That must be quite chilling, I would imagine.
I think it would. I suppose in one way it's going to be chilling, in another way it's going to be a source of relief. I would suggest.
Yeah, I'm not going mad.
Well, actually, there is there may well be an explanation for what I've witnessed. I've never, I haven't seen anything, or had sort of these, or actually sort of had that experience of seeing a ghost, or what I believe to be a ghost. But I believe in ghosts because I know the people that have seen them are, when they've explained it to me, I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that, and all, like I keep saying it, but, all these people can't be wrong. No, I'm never going to have that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a couple of stories that really made me chuckle as well, which are involving officers and Ouija boards, which was a combination I never thought I'd read, Andy.
No, well, I must admit, when I got those stories, there was a vision in my head of the it was a little bit Ashes to Ashes, and I just saw a bit of a Gene Hunt character, old school detective, hard drinking, but that side there was that element of humour in it, which I think the person who's telling the story put in themselves. But it all turned out to be slightly different. When there was one case when they actually, in their drunken sort of efforts, turned out to be pretty spot on, and the one where I think he succeeded in frightening himself more than anything.
Yeah, I mean that's the other striking story. I think the one that you touch on there firstly about because I think they're trying to talk to somebody's dad, aren't they? And there's been a particularly nasty case in the area.
Yes.
And they're just sort of saying, asking for some kind of assistance. And it's one of those that, once again, you go through the story, yeah, it's all a bit strange. And then there's a wonderful, wonderful twist in the tale.
Yeah, and that's, I think when people read on that one, they will know, most people of a certain age will be aware of the case.
Yes.
And they will see how, the officer who told me was just like stunned, and then of course he's straight onto his family, the people who were there. And it took, for the punchline of that, not punchline, but for that story to conclude, it's obviously taken many, many years when he just happened to pick up a book that he was flicking through, and all the information was there.
Yeah. I mean, like you say, it's probably I think, and once again, I might be mistaken, Andy, it's the only story where you've got a kind of celebrity aspect to it, because like you say, it's a pretty notorious case in British criminal history.
Yeah, it's a well-known case, and it's this is something that I just obviously, because the officer was working there at the time, he had an interest, but it's probably an aspect that like he didn't know, that like most people won't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting, very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, when you kind of look back on these now, has it kind of give you a bit more, like you say, has it kind of strengthened your belief in the realm of the paranormal now, Andy, because of the people you've spoken to and their openness in sharing their experiences with you?
100% yes. 100% yes. Like I said, I always had. It started off with the open mind, and it's turned out that without a doubt, I'm 100% certain of the existence of ghosts and the paranormal, and I have no issue in sort of putting that out there, because the people, as I say, I've dealt with evidence all my police career, and I believe I've been presented with some overwhelming evidence.
Absolutely. I think the last part of the book I'll touch on is once again you've got a chapter about strange objects being sighted in the skies. But I think the one I found really interesting is the gentleman that sees a squadron of 1940s planes.
He sees a plane, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And again, we have normally when we think of things in the air, we think there are a couple of UFO stories in the book, which are I think are quite good. Particularly, one of them is an indoor UFO. But getting back to your point, yeah, again, but it was corroborated, wasn't it? Because he tells me the story, and then we look back, and uncannily enough, it happens to be other retired police officers sometime before have seen the same plane in the sky that they think is coming to crash, subsequently disappears and doesn't crash.
Yeah, and I mean that's quite a weird story, because when I read that, there is a very similar story, just outside of Sheffield, in down towards, I'm trying to think, it might be on the way to Buxton area. To be fair, I think it's that way out. And they had a spate of people who saw a very similar kind of situation, Andy, in the fact that they saw a plane in distress, and it looks to have come down nose first into a farmer's field.
Yes.
And then they get there, there's nothing there, and then only then do they realise they didn't hear anything.
Yes.
And I just think, wow. And when I saw that, it was really odd, because it's very similar to I think it was at the end of the 70s. It was quite well reported. It might have been on Arthur C. Clarke, I think. That's when they were talking about strange objects. And it was peculiar that every witness said that at the time, none of them realised it was in complete silence. But they couldn't hear anything. It was like they were in a bubble, just seeing something happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as I say, I am not. I don't profess to be an expert or have any knowledge, and just thinking now, people say, well, yeah, but it's not. You can't have a ghost. Well, we might be seeing the event, not the object. If you're with me.
Yeah.
It's like the officers who went through the car. Yeah, I appreciate that. A big hunk of metal cannot. I'd be surprised it can come back and. But maybe they've gone through the events. I don't know. Maybe people can help me out. It's
Yeah. I mean, it is a strange one. I think when you've got things that aren't people, like you say, I mean, like ghostly animals and ghostly vehicles, I think that takes you to a different level, because obviously people mention things such as the stone tape theory, where, traumatic events are recorded in the environment and become on a loop.
Yes.
But all of these are quite modern as well, so it's very interesting in that aspect that these scenarios occur. But like you say, with the car, that's a really interesting one, primarily because of the whole situation. You've got two officers head-on smash. It's remarkable.
Yeah. I think they went through it. It wasn't head. It appeared in front of them.
Oh yes.
They thought we're going to hit this straight behind. She just appeared from that, and they went straight through it.
Yeah.
Drove straight through it.
Oh goodness.
And onto the incident they were going to. But we're talking about something that's happened in the space of seconds.
Yeah.
I think the actual story is only a paragraph long.
Yeah.
But you could end up talking for hours about trying to what on earth has happened here.
Yeah, it's striking. I mean, it also reminded me of an incident up here at Stocksbridge bypass, Andy, which gained some real notoriety because two police officers were involved, and they're one of the few occasions I can remember, in the older days, where you had serving police officers who were quite happy to go public with what happened to them.
Yeah,
And I think that's what always made that story a bit more, once again, credible,
yeah,
ironically enough, was the fact that these two chaps were very, very happy to basically say, yeah, we had something really strange happen to us, and neither of them could explain it at all.
that's a very famous case. Yeah, and both the officers were named at the time. They came forward and said what they saw and what happened. The Enfield haunting.
Yeah.
There's also a police officer involved in that who saw the chair floating in midair, I believe. And of course, more recently, we have the incident in Scotland, the poltergeist with the, I think it was the Chihuahua that was meant to be floating in midair.
Yeah, I think was that the Sauchiehall poltergeist. I think it was. Is it Sauchiehall poltergeist case, that one, Andy?
Is it? I don't. Was it Ruther Glen or if anyone Googles like police poltergeist Scotland, it comes up. I think it was a couple of years ago straight away, and I think there's an awful lot of it was in the newspapers and media stories. Now I did send an email to Police Scotland asking if I could speak to the officers, but no one ever got back to me. So there are still sort of these modern cases that are out there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was one thing, there's one particular case, and you've not mentioned it in either of your books, and this, it's not a point of criticism at all, Andy, but I've always been fascinated by a very notorious poltergeist in Birmingham, which was the I think it was Ward End.
Yes. Oh, the stones on the windows.
Yeah, I mean, were you serving through that period? Because when I saw that story, I found that baffling in how much was going on, and how much, once again, the police, which is what made it stand out, I would say, Andy, was the fact that I think the Chief Constable of West Midlands Police was actually on television talking about this incident.
Yeah, I mean, purely because if I can't get hold of anybody, if somebody had come forward and said I was on that job, I would have gladly sort of taken their account down. But yeah, what year was it? I joined in '82.
I think it started, if my memory serves me right, I think it started '81 and it went on for about 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't recall it. I mean, but I do know the one you mean, when the windows have been broken constantly, and they had officers strategically placed on observations and all sort of cameras, and it was really really odd, that one.
Yeah, I mean I think that was it was on a special edition of Arthur C. Clarke. Once again, I always end up mentioning him at least once in an interview, Andy, regardless of who I speak to. But I think it was just a groundbreaking programme, and it's probably why it sticks with people. And that one, once again, they had officers in people's gardens and hiding in sheds.
Yeah.
And they were basically interviewing all the people in the area. And I think one poor woman, I mean, obviously this is like 30 odd years ago, I think she'd ended up, it had cost her £700 in new windows, which back in those days was nothing to be sniffed at. That was quite a hefty investment.
Well, there was an awful lot of police resource put into that incident.
Yeah.
Which shows that they were taking it seriously, but it just ended up unexplained, Yeah,
it just seemed to fizzle out quite surprisingly, and like you say, I mean, it went on, and the other aspect of all this was that these were rather hefty pebbles that were being thrown through people's windows. If anybody had been unfortunate enough to be in the way,
yes,
it would have caused serious injury and possibly even worse.
Yeah. It's and it was, even today, 30 years later, none of us are any the wiser about what was causing it.
Yeah, I mean that's the other aspect of that whole case that makes me think, something's not quite right here was the fact that nobody was hurt, even with with all these windows breaking and big pebbles flying in at high speed. Nobody got hurt.
No, it's a real odd. Odd, I think, is the best way to describe that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, listen, Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you again. Congratulations on the second volume. I can't recommend this book highly enough. It's fascinating. So just remind us, which charities are all profits going to?
They go to Cherry Orchard Garden Services, which provides education and life skills for people with learning difficulties and autism. My lad goes there, training to be a gardener. Yeah. Good local charity up in Burntwood in Staffordshire.
Absolutely. So not only do you get a fantastic collection of first-hand reports from the police, you're also doing some damn fine work there as well by purchasing these books. So, Andy, where can everybody find your work and get hold of a copy of both books?
It's on. You can get them on Amazon. The digital download and the paperback's now available on Amazon as well. So there was. I think it took a while, but they're starting to come out. If people ordered them a few weeks back, the books are now starting to be delivered.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And, I think it's $2.99 for the Kindle version, which is an absolute steal compared to some of the rubbish that you can buy for that price.
Even more of a bargain, Paul. $2.49 for the Kindle.
Oh, marvellous! There you are. You heard it from the horse's mouth. And I mean, the book's fantastic value for money, and like you say, it's great work for a charity as well. So once again, Andy, thank you so much for coming on. All the very best. I hope you may consider doing another volume one day. You never say never, my friend, because both books are brilliant, and I would love to see another one down the line. And I appreciate you've probably got other endeavours, and we wish you all the success with those as well. Yep. So, Andy, thank you so much again for your time, and take care.
Thanks very much for your support, Paul. All the best.
Very welcome.
Thornton Road, Birmingham. It's not the quiet suburban neighbourhood it seems. 5 of these houses are under siege. Night after night, rocks rain down on them. The bizarre bombardment has lasted more than 6 years. Glass in every window has been shattered, forcing the residents to erect barricades to protect their homes. The stones seem to come from nowhere, yet the damage they do is real enough. Not just to the buildings, but to the householders' nerves and bank accounts.
We've had all the panes but 2 go on the garage, which are the big panes. I think they're about 14 foot, with reinforced glass, which cost nearly £700 to be replaced. And we have since they've been replaced and the lining's been put up. We've had another 4 panes go now.
Most of the windows on the veranda have been broken. Over £500 worth has been put in there. Various other windows have been cracked, and we have now wired all those windows and have been wired for nearly 12 months.
Birmingham's police confess their stumped. In charge, Chief Inspector Len Turley.
When I first came here some 12 months ago, I thought at that stage that I would put 2 policemen on it and it would be finished in a couple of days. That has proven to be totally wrong.
The case has all the hallmarks of a poltergeist outbreak. Its eeriest feature is the way the rocks seem to come out of the blue. In vain, the police have combed the gardens for vandals. No human being seems to be throwing the stones. Yet the stakeout goes on in Thornton Road, night after night.
At this stage, we've probably wasted somewhere in the region of 3,500 man-hours in observations and inquiries in the Thornton Road area. The backs of these 4 houses in Thornton Road are virtually a battleground.
And clues are hard to come by.
This is a selection of the stones. This one is about average size. As you can see, it is quite a hefty stone. It's a pebble. It looks as if it's come from a seashore, but it hasn't. The gardens of these houses in this area are all have these pebbles in them. The interesting thing about this and all the others that we've had is everyone appears to have been washed or scrubbed. None of them contain any dirt at all. we have had police officers lying, standing, hiding themselves from 6 p.m. in the evening until 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning in all kinds of weather. They have been on top of roofs of adjoining properties, and in all these occasions, the only thing we can say is at certain times, police officers have heard what they say appear to be stones striking the roof or the back of houses. In none of the occasions when we've been doing observations have we seen anybody.
It's as though somebody's watching you, actually going up into a room and drawing the curtains, and you get stones come over as soon as you seem to appear at the window. It's uncanny, really, because it's just as though somebody's focused on you all the time.
I don't really know what's going on down here. This has been going on for a period of 18 months, and we haven't got a clue who's doing it at all.
Already this year, we have arrested 1,997 criminals. We have solved, in the time we are doing this inquiry at Thornton Road, we have recorded and solved 5 murders, 2 of which have been extremely complicated, and the inquiry was very protracted. And we've used the same expertise on our stone throwings as we have on these other incidents, and we're still no farther forward with the stone throwings.